I'm Alissa Baranik.
Hello, and I'm Liberty Lafferty, and you're listening to Girls Offset.
We're two best friends navigating life, both in and out of the film industry.
We both love Cinderella movies, Jesus, and bringing the Christian and female perspective to the table.
I'm Tim.
I'm Mary.
It's my mother's name.
I remind you of your mother?
Obviously, I should have thought this through more.
All right, so the theme for this week is how has romance changed in the past 100 years? Because I love Top Hat, and I have watched it multiple times, especially since like high school. I love musical theater, and I love like the tap dancing. And I mean, if you have not seen Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, which you have, Alissa, but any of our viewers haven't seen it, it is an icon of cinema and cinema history. But I'm not a huge fan of how they handle a lot of the romance, and I think it reflects on the 1930s. So please tell me about a little bit more about Time, please.
Yeah, for sure. So I was asked to find a modern romance rom-com movie that would kind of portray our old to new. And I was like, well, that's going to be hard because one, I'm not a huge romance person to begin with. And then the other thing was just, there's not a lot of good romance films, I believe, in present day, because I wanted to pick one that was not just like, oh, I like this movie for the fashion and it's pretty. I wanted a movie that genuinely highlighted what I thought romance should be portrayed in film. And that's why I chose About Time, because I feel like it is I know the plot is not realistic at all, but it just feels so grounded and so real, and that's what I want in a film when it comes to relationships and marriage and romance, is something that's just real and not, we're gonna go to paradise and spend a bunch of money and be rich, because that's not a real marriage unless you have a lot of money, and good to you.
I mean, we're trying very hard. I think it was such an interesting choice, I would say, like, when you have a theme and then you have to like find movies to fit that theme, I think it can make it more difficult, to like define like the perfect thing. But I really like About Time is such a good movie. Like I was not expecting it to be as good as it was. I cried. I had a few people over. We all cried, and it was just like, oh my gosh, this is it's a really well made movie. It hit me. So. Please, can you tell us a little synopsis about Time, please?
So About Time is about Tim. He comes of age and his father pulls him aside and tells him that all the men in his family have the ability to go back in time. But he gives them the very specific advice of like, hey, because we've done this for years, don't go and try to make yourself rich or powerful or whatever. It always backfires. I strongly recommend that you use your powers for the most simplest of things. And the dad does what I would have done, read as many books as possible. And I'm like, I love the father. So Tim decides his goal is to use it to find love. And he is in love with his sister's best friend, who is played by I don't want to say very young, but at the time up and coming Margot Robbie. Like, this is before Margot Robbie was big.
But wasn't it her first film? I'm pretty sure it was like her first movie.
It may have been. It's one of her early films.
She's so cute in it. Like, oh my gosh.
So he is in love with Margot Robbie. And he uses his powers, but it doesn't work out because at the end of the day, she's just not into him. But then he meets a woman later in life named Mary. And Mary, he has to use his powers, but not because he's trying to make her fall in love with him. They had the perfect date, and he knows that they are perfect together, but he has to make a sacrifice of going back in time where he never met her and went on the date to help his best friend. So he goes back in times and causes that, but now he has to win back this girl that he knows that they're destined to be together. And you might think, oh, that's the rest of the movie. It's not. That is like the first maybe 40 minutes, and then the rest is their marriage and just living. And that's the thing, like throughout the movie, he realizes when he wants to prevent something bad from happening, not in their marriage, but just in life, he can't because it's too big of a change. So he has to learn to just go along with it. So for example, his sister is in a bad relationship. He tries to go back in time and prevent her from ever meeting him, But by doing that, it prevents them from having the child that he was supposed to have. And then he has another child that's not the child he was, he grew up with. So he has to make that sacrifice and go back and allow his sister to make those mistakes. And now he can't go back in time to prevent that. And they just have to work it out like a normal person would. Or another example, and this is this makes me cry. His dad gets cancer and he's preventing constantly. He keeps going back before the dad dies so he doesn't have to be without his dad. But his wife wants another baby. And the rule is, it's a very convoluted rule, but the point is you can't go as far back before your child is born, because if you do, then you might not have the same child you had in that present timeline. So for them to have a third baby would mean that he can't see his dad anymore. And it's just, I am about to cry. It's such a beautiful movie, just about realizing to enjoy the time you have with someone and just not living in the future or the past, but in the present. And it's such a beautiful film. And we'll go more into detail. But Libby, tell us about Top Hat, because we need something a little lighthearted right now.
Yes, Top Hat is lighthearted. I would say it is the frothier of the two ones that we chose. I think last time we recorded, I had the more serious movie, and it's Alissa's turn now, and it's so, the 1930s, once again, being on the history train, but very depressing. And I really love that this was one of those movies that did just fantastically well, because it is so frothy, it's so entertaining, it is the most unserious thing you're ever gonna watch, but it also has this the most romantic dance ever. So, it's about Jerry Travers, who he goes to London to star in a show produced by his friend Horace Hardwick. So he comes across this beautiful, gorgeous girl named Dale Tremont. And so Horace's wife is trying to set up Dale and Jerry because she thinks that they would be perfect for each other. The first time that Dale meets Jerry, he is just kind of having fun in his room, which is right above hers in the hotel, and he makes a horrendous noise and wakes her up, and then she has a list well, what the heck are you doing? Who do you think you are? Later, in the hotel, she asks if someone can show her where Horace is because she's supposed to meet up with Horace, or she's asking about it, and the server points to it, and he points to Jerry. So she thinks that Dale's husband has been hitting on her, and she gets really upset at him. And then so the rest of the movie is them in this complicated misunderstanding, and it kind of reminds me of a Shakespeare play almost, because it's if they just all sat down and asked each other things, it would be fine, but they can't do that, and it creates a lot of hilarious situations. So Dale is down in Italy, and Jerry and Horace go and join her for the weekend, along with Horace's wife, Madge. So while they're in Italy, Jerry has more opportunities to romance her, and how he romances her is through the dance, and is through pursuing her. And we get to the most wonderful moment in cinematic history called Cheek to Cheek, where she's wearing this absolutely gorgeous feather dress, and it is just... oh, I love that scene. And so then he's dancing with her, but then by the end she's like, man, I fell in love with you, but you're married. I can't do this anymore. And so, it's a great movie. It will make you happy. I'm always in awe of the tap dancing. I think that's the best part. So they get it all cleared up. A lot of other miscommunications happen, and then they eventually dance off into the sunset in love together. So a great relic of the 1930s. I think it's wonderful. You'll actually, when you watch this movie, you see it's referenced in a few other movies that have come out later. So I just say, see it because it's just a cultural moment. But hopefully that somewhat synopsisizes, if that's the right word to use, but part of the movie.
I guess it's time for us to say, did we like the movie or not? So I guess I can go first. Did I like Top Hat? I didn't. I know.
No! Oh, okay, well, this will give us something to talk about. That's fine. Okay, go ahead.
I know. Look, it doesn't say that, you have bad taste. I just did not like the... Romance movies are very hard for me. I watch them all the time because I know what I'm getting into, but I just typically am not a huge fan of them because it does the trope that, hey, it's not a bad trope. It's just a trope I don't like. Misunderstandings where you can just sit, and if you just had the conversation, this wouldn't have been an issue. And for some reason, it drove me crazy. And then I knew Cheek to Cheek. I knew that song. And I thought like that was gonna be like the end of the movie. Like that's when they finally are together and he sings the song to her, and it's not. It's like halfway through. The last song of the movie is such a waste because it's the Picadilla.
Piccolino, I think.
And it was dumb. That's the last song is just them sitting there watching the Italian parade. Like it wasn't. And then so I didn't know if Ginger Rogers could sing. She can. And then they gave her the lamest song. I will say though, before let me give it like a little praise.
Okay, please.
I really liked when Fred Astaire goes up and he does his Broadway performance for Horace's friends, and they do the whole thing with the tap dance and the cane, he just shoots at them and stuff. I thought that was amazing. The song was great. And I like the opening where he's in the gentleman's quiet room. I think there's so much like sweet and cute stuff. But then once the misunderstanding happens, it's just, I get frustrated. So it's a personal peeve. It has nothing to do with the film itself. Again, it's a classic, I understand. Just wasn't quite for me. But anyway, let's stop talking about that. Libby, what'd you think of About Time?
I loved it. I thought it was great. I have to say I think I mentioned this earlier, but I was really expecting it to be mostly about romance, and when it kind of kept going, I was like, oh, and then I started crying, because I was just like, oh, this is so good. I think it was so fascinating that despite a movie about someone having magical powers, it ends up becoming very normal. Like, he basically has to deal with the same things that we all have to deal with, and I liked that. I thought it was so interesting and just a really cool way to explore the universality of our lives and the things that we have to go with. It was kind of funny though, okay, you have the magical time travel abilities. It felt a little convoluted, and I want to ask your opinion on something because watching this movie, it kind of felt like I was watching a book adaptation, because I wanted to ask you if you have noticed this, because some movies to me, they seem like, oh, that's a book adaptation movie, just because of the way that it's structured. About Time is structured very differently from the typical, Save the Cat thing. So what do you think about Time structure? Did you get the same vibe that I did?
Yes. I actually wanted to ask this question about Time. Would you consider it a romance? Because the first time I watched this movie, I didn't see it as a romance. I saw it as a coming of age story, or just a story between a father and a son, and not a husband and a wife. Now, watching it again the last few times, and again the first time I watched it I wasn't married, now I'm married, I do see it more as a story about a husband and a wife, but more from the husband's perspective. I see it more still as a coming of age movie and less of a romance, because the romance aspect lasts maybe the first of a 3-act structured film, it feels like. What about you? What do you feel?
Yeah. Well, I would agree with that, and I think if we're gonna stay on theme, it's something that we can only talk about because I watched this and I'm really happy I watched it, and I think it's great, but it doesn't, it does show what a healthy marriage is like, and it has, your other relationships, but I guess, I was really interested in how he pursued Mary, and how their relationship worked, and the dynamics of that, and, yeah, I wouldn't, it has that romance, but I wouldn't say it's a romance movie overall, because there's so much, it's so much more. And not to say that, other romance movies are better or worse or whatever. I just think that this one is not something, I would categorize, as the romance movie. But I'm happy I watched it. I thought when I grew up, seeing the posters on, bus stops, or just kind of, it being there. Then watching this, I was like, oh, it's so much more than that. And I'm surprised that people don't talk about it more. Because it's a really good movie, so I liked it. I'm sorry that you didn't feel the same way about Top Hat. But I think something I want to ask you about with Top Hat is, what did you think about the scene where they're in the shelter and it's, raining? How did you feel about that scene?
Okay, so here's my thing. In both of these films, a man pursues a woman. But in one perspective, on About Time, he knows that they are destined to be together because they had a real date, and he knows, if you just listen to me, you would understand that we are perfect for each other.
Oh, but sorry, when he's in the art gallery, oh, it's so cringy. Oh, anyway, sorry, please keep going, but I'm just remembering that. Ooh, okay.
But with this movie, it's more she's hot, I want to date her. But she kind of gives off, okay, maybe I like you, but I don't know. So in the shelter part where they're with the clouds and stuff, I think it's nice, but I still feel like there's a little bit of like, hey, I don't know if she's giving you enough to say, hey, I like this or not. And granted, it's the 1930s where it's like, what do women know? I know what's best. So I feel like, with Top Hat, he's like, hey, you got the girl because you kept going after her. With About Time, when he goes after her and it's awkward, she's like, no, get away from me. This is my boyfriend. Leave me alone. So it's like there's consequences for him failing at trying to get her attention. As to with Top Hat, with Jerry, it's like, nope, you're rewarded, even if she may or may not have wanted you. I mean, in the end, she did, but I felt like she did not give enough to say, yeah, come after me. So I don't know. I guess that's why I like with this movie, there's parts of me that, like, even with Cheek to Cheek, because she still thinks Jerry is Horace and he's a married man, there's a part of me that's like, I don't find this romantic, because she's like, what is going on? Is my best friend a swinger? Because she seems very fine with me dancing with her husband and being like, go on, hang out with him. So it's just, I mean, Madge is the best character in that movie.
Oh, she totally is. I love her. I want to be her. Just like, she just does not, like, her and Horace, like, I don't know why they're still married, but like, it's so funny how she just has all this contempt for him the whole movie. She's just like waiting for him to admit about all of his affairs, and I'm like, oh, get him, Madge, get him. I love her. But I think what I would say, like, I also agree with that. Like, Top Hat, I think it improves the more you watch it, because you know that they are meant to be together. And I think too, I saw it at such an impressionable age that I wasn't like seriously thinking about that. But I also don't agree with the way, because being romanced, I think, does require a certain amount of pursuit, and I think it's very flattering as a woman when a guy comes after you. And I would say, like, in my experience, if a guy is intentionally saying, hey, let's go on a date, hey, I like you, like, being very intentional and straightforward with that, usually that's when a man is more, like, they actually are a better person. And things will work out, in my opinion. Like, that's how I feel about relationships. It's like, things should be straightforward. When things are overcomplicated, it makes for great movies, but usually when people are meant to be together, they kind of know what they want and they go for it, And so there is, like, elements of that in both of these movies, but like with Top Hat, I don't really agree, because I feel like maybe there's a societal expectation on women where they kind of had to put up a bit more of a fight and pretend they didn't like it, and then I don't like it when society builds that into romance, because then it opens the door for a lot of women who don't want to be pursued and who could get raped or something like that, It's like they just don't, you have to build a society and expectations where there is the consent is enthusiastic. And I think that's like, and even just consent to go on dates and stuff with people. But like, when I was watching About Time, like, you got to admit, Lisa, some of the stuff he does is a little bit manipulative. Like he uses his powers, which I think any of us would. That's what I felt when I was watching it. But like, it's not like I wonder what it would have been like if he's like, oh, she has a boyfriend, maybe I should, like, try to find somebody else, Like, do you think that would have, like, how do you, because I felt like it was a little bit, but I'm also like, but I would do the same thing, so how do you feel about it?
I think, though, that, like, we talked about, like, women, like, being pursued, I think I think it was acceptable, because he's like, yeah, but she met him because she didn't meet me. And forget that guy. I'm the right, like, I'm gonna, like, all is fair in love and war.
In our modern day and age, too, like, we have access to, like, social media and everything. So you can actually stalk people and learn a lot about them online, How do you feel about that versus, like, maybe back in the 1930s where you could ask your friends about it?
I think in some ways that's actually really romantic, that in the 30s you had to inquire about someone and not just go on their Facebook and be like, they like Lord of the Rings 13 years ago? Well, then I'll use that as my pickup line. Like, no. I think that, I feel like there's more effort when you have to inquire and ask. I don't know. Again, I know there's a lot of people who've met online, and dating apps are great for that. But I also feel like there's a little bit more romance in a small town and finding someone and putting in the work and the effort to get to know them more than just being like, well, I saw you like this, so I know you're into that. Like, it's just, I think there's more to it than that. So yeah, I think that there is some benefits to the past of when it comes to relationships than today. But I think that's like the one just amazing thing about just love. It never changes. It's still like, it's a beautiful creation from God that we all get to experience in some way or another.
Well, can I ask you real quick? Are you someone that feels like there's only one person for you, or are you someone that like feels like there could be potential many?
I think for me that there can be potential. And why I say that is because people, people die, you lose the first person you're with, and then later on in life you meet someone else and you click. So I think there are potentials out there. Now, when you're married and that's the person you're with. But I don't necessarily believe in like, there's only my twin flame, my one true love. Don't look into twin flame. That's a cult, by the way. But anyway, to answer your question, I don't think there is like just your one true love and that's it and you'll never meet anyone else. No, I think you can definitely meet other people in life. What about you on your side of that?
I am very much on the side of I could potentially match with many people, and I feel like it is extremely romantic to say, oh, there's only one person out there for me. In a lot of Hollywood movies, they're like, oh, you just click with someone. It's like a fire. It's like a lightning bolt, speaking of Bridgerton. But, like, with realistically, I can get along with many people. And I think it's if you believe the lie that, oh, there could always be someone out there that's better for me, like, this is going to sound bad, but there's a lot of people online that are like, oh, you never settle down with somebody. And I wanted to ask you how you felt about that, because for me, part of being married is choosing someone, and you say, hey, I'm going to settle down with you. All of your issues, all of the good things about you, I am accepting that this is it, and this is the person that I'm going to grow with. What do you think about that, Alissa, when you hear people say, oh, never settle, don't settle?
I guess the thing is, like, when I would have to ask the person, like, what do you mean by settle? Like, in the way of being like, I should wait for perfection, because that's never going to happen. There is no perfect person. And that goes back into the logic of you have that one person and that's the person you're destined to be with. And I disagree with that. But I will say, like, have standards. Check for red flags. Don't just go to the first person who comes a knocking. When you're dating with someone, you have to put them, don't put them through the ringer, but that's when you start testing the relationship before you decide, hey, let's get married. Because when you get married, that's when it really gets tested. So again, I think that you shouldn't settle down quickly. I think you should think about it before you decide who you're going to be with for the rest of your life, potentially. But I'm not going to say like, oh, well, if they got this little quirk, don't bother until you find the right person. Because there's that stupid... I'm sorry, I don't want to be mean to people who do this, but I hate when women are like, I wrote a list of everything I want in a man and I'm praying to God and I won't marry him until, and like the description is like, he has to have blonde hair, blue eyes, has an Australian accent, loves surfing. Like, those are such superficial, stupid things, and you may or may not get that. That's where I say, like, hey, no, settle down if you want to, if you find someone. But if there's just like that one quirk, you gotta pray about it and think about it. That's why I strongly recommend, if you're dating or considering getting engaged, to do one of my favorite games, Hard Questions. And what it is I just get on my phone, I write down questions that could be not as serious, but then it goes into very serious territory, and ask one or two on a date and just start having those conversations, because these are conversations that you need to have before you may want to consider getting married and settling down. So questions could be like, how many kids do you want? Where's your relationship with the Lord? What are your thoughts on X, Y, and Z? Having those conversations, because I'm not saying that like, oh, if they disagree with you, that's a deal breaker, but it could potentially be one depending on the question you want to ask. So strongly recommend doing that. So I do want to ask, okay, what is the most romantic thing that you got from Top Hat?
I think it's the dance. And I think it's the way that they use that art form to show... Oh, it's so gorgeous. So let's talk about that, the scene where they're in the park with all the rain and everything. You can actually see in their dance, it's really interesting because they don't touch each other until most of the way through the song. As they've played around, but they've gone back and forth with their different dance move, and then they do everything in unison, not touching each other. And then right at the end, they get together and they hold each other, and then they have like a dance where they're like swirling around the whole area. And that's quite romantic because it shows how people like kind of like slowly here and there, they play back and forth, they have some banter, and then they kind of do things together, and then they start getting feelings and everything. But the most romantic scene, I know I know you disagree with it, but the most romantic scene for me is Cheek to Cheek, because I think the really interesting thing about it is he doesn't know that's how she feels. She should definitely, I agree with you, she should tell him directly, and that's not how I operate, but I love the way that he sings to her and he holds her, and like Ginger Rogers is such a beautiful actress because she can really sell the fact that she is finding this very romantic, and just the strength of them, the way that he can dip her in it. I find that all of that physicality and the grace of their moment, like it's so beautiful. And just like, I think dance for me, like the way that you can really express those emotions with music through your body, I find that super romantic. And just the idea of like potentially, like, I'm not as finessed as they are, but I see them doing it, and I see it's like a dream almost of like, I would love to be able to do that. And like, it seems so romantic to be that close with somebody and to be doing such complicated moves with them, and the trust that you have to have. So I love Cheek to Cheek. I think too the song and the lyrics or everything is better of just finding that simple moment with the person that you love, and how that is a more thrilling and more wonderful than anything else that you can ever experience. So I hope I sold you a little bit more on it, but that's my favorite romantic thing.
No, I understand where it comes from. And again, I knew that scene was in the movie. I just thought it was in a different place. So I still like think like, oh, it's a very sweet scene, but there's still that part of me, it's like, she doesn't, but she's still confused, and I want to hug her because, and like, she gives up at the end, and she's like, I'll just get married to whoever because I give up. And then like, I love how she's all like, I got married. Like, she just doesn't seem happy at all. Like, she's just given, like, or like when he's like, they're in the newlywed suite, and what's her, Alberto.
I love him.
Yes. He's like, Dale, come here. And she's like, hi, Alberto. And I'm like, my goodness, you just got married. Like, why was this the decision you made?
But I think a lot of people do that though, eh? Like, somebody, I know people who like, they just get married because they're like, or they get into a new relationship. Maybe we don't get married so easily. Like, people date more easily than they get married. But I'm like, we know people that go into rebound relationships, that go into relationships with the wrong ideas in mind, and they use people to feel better about themselves. So, I mean, maybe that makes me not feel that good about Dale, but it's just kind of like, I think it's a very human thing to do, and I think that's why the movie has a lot of fun poking fun of that, of like, oh, well, she just went and found somebody else to get married to. That'll solve her problems. Like, no, it'll make them worse.
All right, well, I think I can talk about my favorite part from About Time.
What was so romantic about it, please?
So hard because there's so many scenes that I like, but I think the number one scene for me is, and it's not that romantic, but I really like it, is when, so Mary is she's like a publisher assistant. So she'll read the books and see if they'll get approved for publishing. So all she does is read every day, which is an amazing job. And they have kids at this point, and they weren't watching the kids, and the daughter got a hold of the manuscript and shredded it. And Mary is just furious and freaking out, and they're trying to fix it. And Tim's like, oh, let me go. I gotta go in, because to go back in time, he has to go into a closet, and she can't tell her. So she never knows that he can go back in time. So she's like, no, you can't leave. You have to. He's like, no, let me leave. She's like, you cannot leave. You have to help me. And I find that the most romantic scene because it's a real relationship. And in real relationships, you can't go back in time. You can't do that. You just have to be in the moment and help each other. And the thing is, like, it's not like, oh, and then after that they hated each other. No. Time moves forward and they're okay and they forget about it. But that's what I like in the story, because the majority of the movie is just focusing on a marriage and learning to live with the fact that you can't solve your problems with magic. It has to just be with love and putting up with it. So for some reason, I find that the most romantic scene because it's just realistic and that's what you go for. There's days that everything's going great and then something so ridiculous happens and you and your husband, you and your wife just have to stick it out and just be with each other. And I love that. So I think, like, for me, I know that's like the least romantic scene in the movie, but for me it is because it's just so real. And then, of course, like, the second one is Mondo, which is when she walks down the aisle in the beautiful red dress and they play Mondo, which is I believe it's a Spanish or it's an Italian opera song. It has it's not romantic at all, but he wanted them to play it because it's his dad's favorite song. And when they walk down the aisle, she looks at him and he starts singing it, but he's in love with her and just infatuated with how pretty she is. And then it rains all over the wedding. They have to bring the outdoor wedding inside, and then, like, after the wedding, he's like, would you want it any different? Do you want it? And she's like, no, it was perfect just the way it is. And it's just, the film is embracing the imperfections, that there can still be romance and love without all the perfection, which is something I love about this movie as to every other romance movie where everything has to be perfect. Because when I was first given this, my brain was like, okay, let's do Crazy Rich Asians. It's an amazing film. I love it, but it's sparkle and wealth, and it's just not real. And when I look at it, I'm like, I love everything about it, but when it comes to the romantic aspect, I don't find it that romantic. I just find it as a you go girl, you stick it to them kind of story. So this one, though, I feel is just a very empowering love story.
Yes, so beautiful. That's such a wonderful part about relationships is that, yeah, embrace the imperfection. I just love how you said that. So would you recommend this as a double feature?
I think for our specific category, potentially yes, but I feel like they're just, again, I don't feel like About Time is completely a romance movie. I feel it more as a coming of age movie. So I would say I don't think it fits well as a double feature because I don't think it fits the category well enough. I think that if I put Top Hat with anything, it would have to be a modern day musical that would focus on romance. Now, what that would be, I think La La Land.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea.
What about you?
I think I would agree with you. I think also I don't regret any of the choices we make. So if we have a double feature, I think it's a great experience getting to watch two movies, and they're not always going to be perfect, but even then, you pulled out the most wonderful romantic moments of that are from About Time, and I think that still makes it a great double feature because you can't always have like two serious things. And it is nice to have something that is so in-depth than something else that is just so spectacle. So like I would recommend it because I would recommend all of our double features, but I think I agree with you where if we really wanted to hone in on the realities of romance, you could talk about La La Land, but La La Land is also like a little bit depressing in that way where it talks about your pursuit of art and how sometimes you can lose people along the way, and so I feel like I like About Time. I think it was a great choice. I was very pleasantly surprised by that movie, and I feel like Top Hat, at least you've gotten some cinema history, if not anything else, so.
I mean, I don't regret watching it. It was great to see a movie that, like, I've heard is very good. It just wasn't for me, and that's totally fine. I still, like, I don't regret watching it at all. Like, it wasn't a movie like, I can't believe I watched this. What have I done? I'm like, no, it was good. I'm happy I got to see it, and I got to know more about you as a person. So, no, it doesn't bother me. I would just say, I'm like, if I had to pair Top Hat with something else, I would probably pair it with maybe La La Land. About Time, okay, see, this is lame because I haven't seen it. I'd put Yesterday because it's the same director and it's about a guy who has a magic power who's trying to find love. Because in Yesterday, it's about, and again, I haven't seen this movie, so I don't know how good it is, but it's about a guy who wakes up one day and the Beatles never existed. So he takes all the music from the Beatles and takes advantage of it to be a celebrity and to win the heart of Lily James. And in the end, I know he kind of gives it up and he's like, okay, I can't, like, I'm stealing, even though, like, in this universe, I'm not stealing, I am, so I cannot do this. So again, it's that story of someone giving a magical power, gaining from it, but then realizing I have to just enjoy life the way it is.
So, like, let me ask you this. Do you feel like Jerry, with being such a good dancer, is that, like, similar to having a magic power?
I guess, because I mean, I feel like their magic power is just they have money. Also, does Dale have a job? Or is she just, like, what's her story?
Oh, so Alberto is her fashion designer. So I feel like she's some kind of like model or dancer or something. Like it's loosely based off of who Ginger Rogers is in general. So I feel like she's just some kind of like very famous model or whatever, and she just happens to be friends with Madge.
All right, so I have to ask, if let's say you were put in the situation where you're Dale, you meet this man of your dreams, but you mistake him for being married. When the reveal happens, would you still accept him for who he is, or because of all the craziness that happened, would you be like, I need a minute?
I mean, I think because it's Dale's mistake, you know, and because she never asks him directly, because I feel like Jerry multiple times tries to ask her, like, what's going on? Like, why are you treating me like this? Like, why are you so mad at me? You know, and she's always like, I think for her it's too embarrassing, and I feel like that just relates to, like, a cultural difference, where, like, she doesn't want to have to explain it because it should be obvious. If he is married, he should just know why she's upset, right? And I'm like, okay, like, you can just talk about your feelings, you know? So I think that's just a generational difference. I would accept him. If I had a man that was as charming, I mean, I love Drew, he's great, but, like, if I had a guy that was as charming and I was single and could dance like that and I could dance with him, heck yes. Because it would be on me. I'd be like, oh, I was the one that misunderstood it. If it was, like, different and he was the one that misunderstood it, I would be like, eh. And the funniest thing at the end, though, was like, oh, we're not actually married. It's just like...
Well, then that had a purpose because his manservant, I'm like, I loved him.
Oh, it tied in.
I liked him until the end. When he gave that one guard, like, he was just super mean to him, I was like, I hate you now. Because that's so uncalled for.
Yeah. You want to know something funny about Top Hat, though? So you know how, like, he has the quote where, like, for the woman, the kiss, for the man, the sword, whatever. It was originally supposed to be, for the woman, the whip, the man, the sword.
I'm so happy they changed that.
Good job on the Hays Code. They did. That was a good thing they did. They changed that. So, that movie is just, it's so funny. Like, reading all the behind the scenes about it.
When Horace and Fred Astaire are in the plane and he's telling her about the woman he met in France, and then he's like, so anyway, I go to the room with her, and then it cuts outside the plane, and then goes back. He's like, so now you understand why I'm nervous to see Madge. And I'm just like, that is the dumbest. I mean, I understand why they had to do it, but I was like, the Hays Code at its best.
But it's so funny because, like, you think about all of these Hollywood people, they've been sleeping around with everybody, like, all the time. Like, it's so ironic. Like, I guess I appreciate that, like, at a certain point, they were like, we are the changers of culture. We have this immense responsibility. But I'm like, but you also are casting all of these people that, you know, they're not the highest moral standards, but whatever. At least Fred Astaire was as far as I know, both him and Ginger Rogers are pretty class acts, but sometimes with people, you just don't want to look into them too deeply, you know? How do you feel that, like, this relates to all of our faith and everything? And thinking about romance, thinking about how it's changed, what are your thoughts on that?
I think, though, like, when it comes to art depicting romance and going with the Christian faith, it's a case-by-case basis, because I feel like there is different perspectives where we look at Top Hat in older movies where the woman plays hard to get, and but she does love him. He just has to pursue her more. And it gives off that Mr. Collins quote where Elizabeth says no, and he's like, oh, I see. You're playing hard to get. Don't worry, I know that. And it's like, no, I just don't like you.
Yeah.
And so there's faults there, but there still is, like, it's clean. They're not having sex before marriage. It's a wholesome, romantic relationship. As to now, where everything's like, test the waters, don't get married right away, date around, cause a lot of drama. So I think in some ways, I don't want to say like, oh, the films were more pure, because there wasn't, because in Top Hat, Horace is having an affair.
Actively.
So I feel like the one thing I get from this is that the culture constantly keeps changing, and the depictions and definitions of love keeps changing. And I feel like it's just Hollywood not having a grip and an understanding what love really is. So in a way, I'm like, I feel very happy to know that, like, hey, these desires or things that the media puts out and tells you fall in love with it's a fairy tale. It's not real. And you won't know what real love is until you experience it yourself, or you come to Christ and you get to know what unconditional love really is. So I feel in some ways that just the Hollywood studios have not quite gotten it because they don't have that faith, or they live very promiscuous, broken lives. So the depiction is very hard. I will say, though, what I like about time when it comes to relationships is that when you get married, you marry the family. And Mary becomes a part of the family and deals with the issues that the family goes through. And that's part of it. You become one. Another thing that I like about About Time that kind of focuses on love is the relationship between the father and the son, and them having to say goodbye to each other and having that moment together. And I feel like in some ways that's how, I don't know, like it just, when he's on the beach with his dad, and when they go back in time, Tom is not like a man anymore. He's a little boy and his dad is younger, and they play on the beach. And there's just, it kind of like, again, I don't know what heaven will be like, but just having that parental love that's so unconditional and having that moment together, it's one of just longing for things that are no longer available. Like again, I have a great relationship with my parents, but we can't do the things we used to because life has changed. But having those moments back, or just having that moment with God and just him loving you and taking care of you, and you being that child that he provides and takes care of. And then one other thing with About Time is the end. The moral is basically very much stated in the film, where after his father dies, his father gives him this last word of advice that says, hey, every day, go about your day, just live it the way you want. But then the next day, go back in time and relive it again, now knowing that any anxieties or fears you had, you don't have to worry about, because you know exactly how the day was, so enjoy it. So the first day he lives it like a normal person. The second day he enjoys all the little things and notices all the wonderful things. And then he says, and in the end, I stopped using my powers and just learned to enjoy the present as it is. And I think that that's, as Christians, is how we have to live, with that act of faith of knowing, like, yeah, things are going to go bad, but I got to keep pushing through and learning to love the things that I am blessed with, and the things that I can't control, I just have to move forward. Because that's the whole thing. He has these time-bending powers, but at the end of the day, he really can't control anything. He can't prevent his dad from dying. He can't prevent his sister from going through bad relationships. So he just has to learn to accept those parts and enjoy the blessing he does have, whether that be relationships, family, what have you. So I think that there are some Christian messages you can pull from this, but as a whole, Hollywood understanding love, I still don't think they quite have it together. What about you with Top Hat?
Like, it's not the type of movie where I, like, have some deep message from it, except for the fact that, relationships are messy, and I think it's great to point fun at that, and to be honest about these things. I like that they make fun of Horace, because Horace is just so silly.
Okay, here's one more question, though, for you, because I answered it myself. Do you think Hollywood has improved with how they depict romance?
I don't know. So you think about the 1930s, Hollywood has only been around for like 20, 15 years or so, and now that we've had over 100 years of these type of movies. So I would say yes and no. There are certain movies that depict romance as well, but I think you compare it to music, a lot of music really plays into unhealthy relationships, or like, oh, you suck, I'm leaving, like whatever. And I think there's a certain amount of, like, when you're creating a movie, you have to have drama. And in order to have drama, you have to have immature and selfish people. And a lot of people that are in Hollywood are immature and selfish, and I'm not trying to point at anybody specifically, but a lot of these celebrities are, and it's just something like, so I would say yes and no. It depends on what movie we're talking about. But I think storytelling has gotten a lot better, and I think that we also have to have space for people that are immature and selfish, and for stories that aren't perfect, and stories that are messy, or stories like About Time, where people are more mature and they're able to pursue and kind of go through a whole relationship.
All right, guys. Well, we hope you have a great day. You find someone you love. Tell someone that you love them, and have a great day. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Girls Offset, the podcast where you can count on the Christian, female, and film industry perspective. We hope you have a blessed day, and we'll see you next time.
Come to the casino and hear them play the piccolino. Dance with your bambino to the strains of the catchy piccolino.